Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, my special guest today is Governor Tom Wolf, and then following him will be one of the state's leading reporters, John Micek. As they say, let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this mask off, and you're going to wonder, why would I take my mask off with the governor of Pennsylvania sitting across from me? Because we have this big plexiglass shield. You can just barely see it, but it covers Governor Wolf and I, and we're talking, and the particles, can't get through.
Get through. Right.
You feel comfortable?
I feel comfortable. I feel safe.
Well, good. Thanks for coming. Well, talking about masks, I want to start with this. There's a big debate about compulsory mask wearing, but Secretary Levine has come on and said, wear a mask, and she's issued an order saying you're supposed to be wearing masks when you're in public. And you've had Senators Casey and Toomey, different parties, come out in support of the mask-wearing policy. So take it. What's your sense about it?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing everything we can to try to stay safe, and it looks like wearing masks actually does make for fewer cases and a safer public. Again, when you wear a mask, you're keeping the people around you safe. So this is something that you're doing for those around you, your neighbors,
Sure.
your family, your friends, people you're being interviewed by. So it makes sense. It also is something, I think, the state order gets to an issue that makes it so that everybody is doing it. You go into a store, and I know early on there were some stores where the employer would say, I don't want my employees wearing masks because I don't want to scare my customers. Right. And so when you have a statewide order, basically it says, no, let's all keep each other safe. Yeah. So employees feel safe, you feel safe, your customers aren't taking that amiss. Right. And so I think it just makes sense. Yeah, well, I'll tell you what,
a couple of weeks ago, I've noticed a large number of folks not wearing masks, both out on the street and you go to the grocery store, you're buying food or whatever. And in the last week or so, I've noticed a big uptick. And now you can't get into a store without a mask. Before, they couldn't stop people from going in. Now there's still a fair number of people who don't wear them. And I'm on your side on this, and I'm not being political about it. It just makes sense. You can't we're talking about life. We're not talking about whether, you get some injury that is easily recoverable. We know what's going on, and coronavirus in our state, we're not now among the top states. It's in the South and out in the western states.
Right. No, I think it's like gravity. I mean, it's really inconvenient, and this virus is sneaky, and it's out to get all of us. And I think we're just trying to defeat it. But gravity's not a Republican or a Democratic thing or a liberal conservative. It's a part of life, and we've got to work around it, make sure that we're doing everything to mitigate that risk. And same thing with the virus. Not a Republican or Democratic thing. It's out there. It's fighting all of us.
All right. Well, let's talk about schools and school opening. As you know, schools are, in a big debate about should they open. I'm talking about colleges and universities. But I'm also talking about elementary and secondary, high schools and all of that. It's obviously much harder when you get down dealing with, young kids in kindergarten and first and second and third and fourth grades. Should that decision basically be left to local school districts? What's your sense about that?
Yeah, the guidance from the state is that our schools are going to open. How they open and how they stay safe is up to the local authorities. So, and different school districts are doing it in different ways. But in the end, we have to make parents feel confident and comfortable sending their children to schools. We have to make sure the teachers the educators are confident that they can be safe and come to school. So different schools are doing it in different ways. We've mandated that every school district has to have a safety committee made up of teachers, of parents, of administrators, to make sure that they're doing everything they can to keep safe. We've made extra funds available to help through the CARES Act and through state funds to make sure that schools are sanitizing and doing everything they can to keep their students and employees safe. But in the end, we can't afford to allow long periods of time to go with people not getting the education we need them to get. That's just a permanent loss. So we're doing everything in Pennsylvania to make sure that our schools can open, but that they can open safely.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk to the governor about police reform. We can't have the governor on and not talk about money, both the federal government and state government. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, if you're wondering why we're not wearing masks, I have my mask here and the governor has his, but we have this huge plexiglass screen between the governor and myself that's blocking any droplets that might come. We both of us feel safe. We wouldn't do it any other way, especially given our guests. We want to make sure that they're protected. All right, Governor, let's start with police reform. What's amazing about it in this state is that it has been bipartisan. Congress doesn't seem to be able to get its act together, and some other states have partisanship. But in the Senate, when two bills were passed that deal with police reform, it was done unanimously, and the House almost unanimously. So what's your overall view of police reform and what's happening in the state?
I think the police reform is proceeding in a way that it's not in. We're not in gotcha mode, trying to make actually the situation that police officers find themselves in better for them, so that they're actually protecting the citizens they serve. They're not the enemy. And so we're working, as you say, in a bipartisan way to make sure that the public is confident in the police service that they get. I mean, there are bad cops, but this is not about that. This is about making sure that we actually have a police service that is responsive and connected to the communities that they serve. I think it's also important to know that we need to make sure that we take this as the broad issue that it is. This is not just about police. They're in the front lines of a system that is could be better in a lot of different ways. And I think we have a responsibility from the point of view of education, the economy, health care, food, all those things, to make a better society so that society they're protecting and defending is a good one.
Well, let's talk about money. The CARES program has brought, can I say, billions of dollars into the state of Pennsylvania, coronavirus aid relief and economic activities. I mean, it's very, very important. And you've been divvying out that money consistent with the law. What have been the major projects in our state or that have received the CARES resources? Well,
first of all, it's not me divvying out. I'm working with the General Assembly, so we're all divvying this out, and I think working together in some very constructive ways. I think the things that I'm proudest of is helping businesses, using CARES Act money to help disadvantaged businesses, about $100 million for small businesses, about $25 million to help community development financial institutions to be a little more forgiving when it comes to interest payments and things like that. So that's just an example. I'm about to go to the market in Harrisburg to talk about CARES Act money being used to make sure we're addressing the issues of food deserts. But there's a lot of money in healthcare, education. We're using this money. There's still some question. We're still hoping that the Senate will work with the House in Washington to
do it nationally.
Local and state governments plug their budget deficits that we all have, and I think they're going to do that.
So overall, before I let you go, are you upbeat about the status of our economy in the state? I mean, obviously, it seems to be recovering. There are a lot of small businesses that aren't making it. Restaurants and bars and other are closed. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think some of the areas that are hardest hit with this recession is the tourist industry.
Oh, I live in Lancaster County. You know, with tourism, and even over in your county, York, a lot of it.
Not a lot, but I mean, the thing that Pennsylvania has is a fairly diverse economy. Yeah. So one of the things that I think is continuing to grow and will do well for us is in a pandemic, a post-infectious disease world. Life sciences are going to be really important. So the universities and the life science industry that we have is going to be important. Our location's more important. In this pandemic, organizations that sell remotely have seen an increase in sales. Amazon. Well, Pennsylvania is the keystone state, so we're great for distribution. So that's going to be helpful for us, I think. Tourism is big in Pennsylvania, but it's not as big in Pennsylvania, say, in Nevada.
Sure.
So we're not as hard hit there. So we have been hit. But I think in some ways we will find that Pennsylvania is going to be in fairly good shape coming out of it.
Okay. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming on. You're always welcome on the program. All right, coming up, we have John Micek, one of the state's leading reporters, and we'll find out what he wants to talk about after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Joining me now is one of the state's leading journalists, John Micek. He's editor-in-chief of Pennsylvania Capital Star. Notice I have this mask, and
come on.
And he got his. We're keeping the social distance, but
I feel like a goldfish,
big plexiglass screen between John and myself. You can see a little bit of it, and that way we don't need our mask to talk, and we're protected.
So when are the feedings? I feel like I'm a goldfish.
Yeah, I know.
You just drop some food over the top for me. We'll be fine.
It's keeping us safe. That's the important thing.
Exactly right.
All right. Redrawing congressional boundary lines and boundary lines for the state legislature. It's been hugely controversial in the state. In 2018, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court redrew the boundary lines for Congress. So where does all this stand? I mean, we're coming up, believe it or not, we're going to come up on another, what?
Another election. We're already in the middle of it. Look, I mean, the legislature ran out the clock. To change the way the state does redistricting, what advocates wanted required a constitutional amendment.
Right.
It's not going to happen now. There's no time on it. So that means we're going to be back to where we were before, with the legislature redrawing the congressional maps through a piece of legislation, an act of legislation with signature from the governor, and then a 5-member commission made up of the 4 floor leaders plus a player TBD who will draw the legislative maps.
So to stop you here, there are 2 different ways. For Congress, it's done by the legislature in the form of a bill. and then there's a commission that does it, and their word is final.
Right. Well, until it's inevitably...
Until it goes to court.
Yes. And so, I mean, if past is prologue, Terry, and it always is, these maps end up being litigated. As you alluded to a moment ago, in 2018, the Supreme Court threw the state's congressional map. In 2011, they threw out the legislative map was litigated before it was finally approved.
So you would guess that it's going to be controversial again.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's more attention on it than ever now, because the way these districts are drawn affects the flow of legislation. It affects what bills come before the General Assembly. It affects, I mean, we're going into an election year now, so voting rights issues like same-day registration and that kind of stuff, all that gets determined.
Yeah. Talking about voting, we're going to have to run to a break, but talking about voting, we've got this mail-in balloting. It was huge in our state. 1.8 million applied for ballots, and counting them and how long it takes. That's a huge issue. We're going to run to a break. When we come back, it's possible if things aren't modified, mail-in balloting, it could be weeks before we know who wins elections in this state. All right, I'm chatting with John Micek. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
Journalist John Micek joins me. Now we're in the business of talking about mail-in voting. It's big. 1.8 million Pennsylvanians applied for them. They all didn't vote, but I'll tell you what, moving into the future, it looks like the wave that's here to stay. 5 states do it automatically to every voter, and then you've got the situation where 34 states like Pennsylvania do it, but they also allow some version of in-person voting. So, John, where does it stand? There needs to be certain reforms made in order to make it more effective, in order to make it more secure.
Yeah, I mean, the counties learned some really hard lessons, Terry, between the new voting machines in the November 2019 elections and the mail-in balloting in the June 2nd primary. In that case, it was up to a week before we had some results finally certified. I think the race for Auditor General was one of them. The results in the 10th Congressional District, so what happened? 10th Congressional District primary. There was just a lot. I mean, a lot.
But what happens on November 3rd when we get turnout that's double, if not more? And if we don't make some reforms, and I want you to talk about a couple of them that are possible, we could be weeks until we have a clue who won the election.
There was one bill in the House, as I recall, that would have allowed the counties to open the ballots early but not count them.
Before election day.
Before the polls close. I mean, that's the one big thing, because if you're sitting there and you're opening ballots and you're getting this flood that comes in, the governor extended the deadline as well, and the deadline for the counting as well, just to accommodate for the flood. But yeah, I mean, it could be a real.
But they could have to end up figuring out a way to count them early, but at the same time, make sure that it's secure, that it's safe, that the fraud doesn't take place. That's the other aspect of it.
Fraud is a red herring. The fraud is practically non-existent. I mean, that's the argument that's been raised by the president. That has always struck me as a tactic to depress turnout. That could backfire, though, on the president, because we know from looking at the maps that Republican voters love mail-in ballots just as much as Democrats do. We saw that in the northern tier. People want to use that. They want to participate, but they also want to make sure that they're safe. This is one of the soundest ways of doing that. And right now we have the Trump campaign joined by 4 Republican members of Congress who are litigating the way the state does this. Yeah, because they don't like the drop-off boxes. I think those are insecure.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the folks have to. A voter has to be certain that his ballot as submitted is secure. I mean, regardless of what the real world.
And the research shows that mail-in balloting is safe and the mail-in balloting is secure. There's this attempt to try to undermine that notion, but it's by and large it's very secure.
All right, let's talk about COVID-19 cases in Pennsylvania. It's been up, it's been down. Obviously, we're not doing what's going on in the South in Texas and Florida and some other, California and some other states. So where does all that stand?
If I recall correctly, I mean, I've not looked at the numbers for a little while, but we have seen spiking. We've seen a steady spike in cases over the last week or so. Allegheny County just
in particular,
Wednesday has been. We're taping on a Thursday. On Wednesday, they announced a 2-week pause on indoor dining. They've been hard hit by it. You know, we've seen we reached a 2-month high in one-day cases back on Monday of this week. So certainly, while we're not in as worse shape as other states, there's still a lot to keep in mind. It's, you know, folks still need to be safe. They need to be out there wearing masks.
The governor talked about that.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
Yeah, he went into that, and I pointed out, and he obviously agreed. It's, in a sense, has bipartisan support. You've got Senators Toomey and Casey, different parties, coming on board and say, where are these? I'll hold it up. Where are these? Where are these?
Yeah. Republican members, despite the messaging coming out of the White House, Republican members of the Senate finally discovered that that's a winning message for them after several weeks of sort of being on the fence about it.
All right, the final topic I want to talk about is police reform. I chatted with the governor about that, and there have been 2 bills that have gone through the legislature that he's obviously going to sign, dealing with defund the police. Has its support among certain progressives, but Governor Wolf is not in favor of it. Senator Casey is not in favor of it. Are there any other reforms that you think are in the offing to deal with the
There is
police?
one bill that's still hanging out there, sponsored by Representatives Summer Lee and Ed Gainey, both progressive Democrats out of Pittsburgh, that deals with police use of force. That was one bill that did not would define it. They did not take that up. They did send the governor a bill the other day. And I'm blanking on the specifics of it, but it was a reform bill the other day that dealt with, I think, PTSD training, or PTSD counseling, and a database of officers who've been in trouble before, so there's some more transparency in hiring. The governor, I think, as you said, did not come out in favor of police defunding, though he does favor police reform. That's not a particularly surprising stance coming from him. But I mean, we've seen other jurisdictions, Terry, like Minneapolis, notably, who are going to completely reorganize their approach to law enforcement.
And that's very controversial.
It's controversial, but it's one that makes a lot of sense. And it's one thing that officers have complained about for a long time, that they've been asked to do so much.
Work.
So I mean, that's sort of the catch-all phrase for it, but things that are outside the training of people who are generally just in the business of trying to catch bad guys. And there are instances where you don't necessarily need a police officer. We've also seen a movement.
But there are many where you do.
Correct.
So you're talking about some combination of things.
Right. I mean, do you send a domestic violence counselor to an incident of domestic violence, or instead of somebody with a gun who is specifically trained in that kind of thing? We're seeing a movement now to try to get, they call them school resource officers, but what they are, in fact, is police officers in schools. There's a movement afoot in Pittsburgh, for instance, to try to get the police out of schools. Because that's not something they're necessarily trained for, and there's other ways to think about this and to approach it.
Yeah. Well, look, John, I want to thank you for coming in. Thanks for the update. I want to thank the governor as well. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well, and particularly make sure you wear these masks.
Right here.